This is the Natural Solutions for Leaky Gut Talk. I'm Katy Wallace. I'm a traditional naturopath and my business is Human Nature. I'm located on Madison's west side. Before we go into the talk, I'd like to state I'm not a medical doctor and I'm sharing this information for health education reasons only. This program is brought to you in partnership with the Willie Street Co-op. I've been consulting with the Willie Street Co-op for I think 13 years now. And so the services I offer are these monthly lectures, which are currently virtual. Next month's lecture is going to be about the health benefits of meat. So meat's something we normally think of as being unhealthy, or some of us have been raised to think it's unhealthy. And so I'll be talking about some of the healthiest meats to eat and some of the things to think about when you're eating meat. And the other service that I offer through the co-op is one-on-one private nutrition sessions. And so you can actually have a private session with me. It's a 45-minute session. All sessions are virtually, and it's just $40. So it's a nice reduced rate for co-op members. And if you're interested in that, you can contact me directly through Human Nature. Okay, so today we're talking about leaky gut. I'm going to explain what leaky gut is. I'm going to talk about what's included on a leaky gut diet. And then we're going to cover herbs and supplements and talk about some special tests that might help someone who has a bad case of leaky gut. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat and I will answer questions at the end of the program. Okay, so what is leaky gut? Well, the technical word for leaky gut is hyperpermeable intestines. So when the intestinal lining becomes more porous, with more holes developing that are larger in size than would be ideal. So basically, the digestive lining has a single layer of cells, and when we develop openings between those cells that are bigger than ideal, that's basically leaky gut. So the gut lining becomes more penetrable than it would be in an ideal state. And we think that this happens for a lot of people. We think it's coincidence with the natural aging process and some different life phases for people, like during pregnancy. It also does appear from preliminary studies that leaky gut is a prerequisite for developing some different diseases. So here is a picture of the gut. You can see on the left that we're looking down at like a close-up microscopic view of the cells in the gut lining. And you can see they're all connected. There isn't space. And then in the picture on the right, we have a picture of leaky gut at the microscopic view. So this is what the gut lining looks like when it's leaky. And you can see the difference between the left picture, that there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of empty space between the green cells. In this particular study, which is cited at the bottom, the healthy gut was exposed to glyphosate, which is a chemical known as Roundup, which is used around the world and also in America. And the glyphosate is on all of our foods, all conventional foods. It's not certified organic. So if you're eating organic food, you shouldn't be exposed to glyphosate. But the amount of glyphosate that was used in the study that provoked this picture of leaky gut that we have, just so we can kind of get a visual of what this might look like, is the amount found on a conventional apple. So if you just ate an apple, had a very small amount of glyphosate, it could have this result, and did in this study. So we'll keep this in mind as we're talking. I'm a very visual person, so hopefully the visual helps you. Here's another way to look at it. A drawing of the gut lining. So you can see here in the middle of the page, the single cell layer that is the gut lining. And you can see these tight junctions that hold the cells together, healthy tight junctions. They're just what they sound like. They're cells that keep the gut lining tight. When we have leaky gut, the tight junctions break down, and there's a process that results in them breaking down. And so there's no longer a barrier between what we put in our mouth and what goes into our digestive system and our bloodstream. And this is actually a really big deal. This is why I'm giving this talk, because I don't think there's a lot of awareness about how important this is. The medical community has come a little ways in the last 5 or 10 years to understand leaky gut, but it's still not something that's talked with most people who have health issues, even though it's at the root of a majority of health issues. And the reason that it's such a big deal is that this single cell layer is our protection. It's a barrier between us and our environment, and it's a barrier between us and our immune system. So let's say, so you can see these little green pieces. Let's say these are just food, or they could be bacteria or toxins. And instead of getting kept out from the bloodstream, when we have leaky gut, they are getting through. And they'll get through down to the bloodstream here. And underneath this layer is a mass of our immune system. 80% of the lymphocytes, for example, the majority of our immune cells reside in our gut lining. And that's very important if the gut starts breaking down, because that means the immune systems are going to see, let's just pretend these green particles are peas. They're going to see peas. And if they see anything foreign, such as peas or whatever it is, coming down into the bloodstream, they're going to attack. And our immune system is really good at attacking, typically. It's going to make antibodies. It's going to make something called pro-inflammatory cytokines. Those are chemicals that are created when the immune system is attacking. And just like the name sounds, they create a lot of inflammation. And then, because this is in our bloodstream, our heart beats and the thunk, this whole mess of inflammation and immune reaction to perhaps what's just a lowly pea is sent throughout the body. So we can have a lot of inflammation, and most of you are probably aware that inflammation is the basis of most chronic diseases. So you have inflammation beginning in the gut and getting sent all around the body. So this huge immune reaction that's happening accidentally due to leaky gut is getting sent throughout the body, and it can cause a lot of different problems around the body. It can cause problems in the bones, problems in the brain. I mean, any body system that gets blood, and that would be every single body system, is potentially affected by this as a root of inflammation. So this can be a really big deal. I'm not saying that everybody has leaky gut, and we have ways of measuring so we can see whether or not someone does or not, but a lot of people do. So just to summarize what I just went through, the digestive and immune screening out process in the gut is not working. And this results in bad stuff, food, bugs at the salad bar, you name it, getting into your bloodstream that normally isn't allowed. And that results in a powerful inflammatory reaction. That's your body's response to this. And if this goes on for a long time, this can lead to disease. And we already know from medical studies that there's a correlation to mood disorders, so anxiety, depression, cancer, heart disease, autoimmunity. We're still learning, so I'm sure the list goes on. This is just another visual of leaky gut. Like I said, I'm a visual person, so you can see on the left how the digestive system is a nice barrier for food particles and yeast, bacteria, and parasites, and only nutrients get through. Those other things do not. And when the gut cells start breaking down, you're getting fewer nutrients, so you could have nutrient deficiencies like iron deficiencies, deficiencies in different vitamins. And you're going to have a lot more allergies and sensitivities because the food particles are getting into the bloodstream, and that's resulting in an inflammatory reaction. Dysbiosis is also mentioned here. Dysbiosis is just a term for the bacteria in the gut being out of balance. And that can be a big issue with leaky gut and can kind of compound the inflammation and the histamine reactions like allergies, rashes, other histamine related issues people have. So people can experience leaky gut for a long time. This is what we know from the studies that have been done so far. We can have an inflammatory reaction because of leaky gut in most parts of the body. So far we know this does happen in the brain, joints, heart, skin, cardiovascular system. So it has a very wide clinical presentation, right? My leaky gut might not look like your leaky gut, okay? I might have a skin rash because of leaky gut. You might have an autoimmune condition because of leaky gut. So it's going to vary according to the person, how this inflammatory situation presents itself. And I had that quiz up at the beginning. Some of you may have seen it. So that's just an example of how leaky gut symptoms can vary. So if you had more than one yes or check mark in the quiz I showed at the beginning, then you may have leaky gut. So you've got signs of leaky gut if you've got more than one checked. So it could be digestion, could be rashes, it could be mental related to focus, brain performance, emotions, attention. Somebody who's really sensitive and increasingly sensitive is a really obvious sign of leaky gut. Somebody getting sick more often, very frequently, someone with deficiencies, or someone with autoimmunity. So these are this accumulating list of how leaky gut can present. And autoimmunity is a big piece of it. 50 million Americans have autoimmunity. So autoimmunity is when our immune system begins to attack our own tissues in such a way that it becomes pathogenic or like a disease state. And one of the interesting things that scientists have found is that leaky gut has to happen before autoimmunity can happen. So there does seem to be this important link between the gut health, the integrity of the gut lining, and the development of autoimmunity. And that was found in this diabetes study. I see that people are leaving some chats. I'm going to see if I need to pay attention to that. Hang on one sec. Okay, good. People are asking some questions. I'll come to questions. I just wanted to make sure everybody could hear me. Okay. Okay, so leaky gut is related to food sensitivities. If we have leaky gut, then food is getting into our bloodstream below the gut lining and causing the body, or as a result, the body's going to be like, what is this foreign thing in the bloodstream? I'm going to make an antibody to it, and I'm going to try to digest it and break it down. And the process is the immune system doing that creates inflammation, which is how the food sensitivity presents. And it could present as different symptoms for people, like a cerebral symptom. They're moody, they can't think well. It could be a stomach ache. It could be a headache after eating the food. It could be a lot of things. So there's a connection between leaky gut and food sensitivities. And there's also a connection between food sensitivities and autoimmunity. And this field is called molecular mimicry. And so I just think this is fascinating, and I wanted to share this particular study as an example of what scientists are looking at in this field. So when the immune system sees food in the bloodstream, in the case of leaky gut, it attacks what's called the peptide. And our immune system is attracted to really large peptides, like big targets. And this will be important later when I talk about what foods to eat. And so the peptide, or the protein of the food, is what the immune system is flagging in order to make antibodies. And it turns out that food peptides are identical to tissue peptides. So this is a real problem because if we make an antibody to a food peptide and it looks like a tissue peptide, when that blood gets circulated through the body, right? Because blood's always getting moved through our body, moved around so that cells can get nourishment. Those antibodies are getting circulated around the body, and they will attack tissues that look like the food. So this is what molecular mimicry is all about. And this is a study where they found, scientists who did the study found soy, corn, spinach, and tomato cause top food reactions for people with multiple sclerosis or MS. And so basically, the protein structure of soy, corn, spinach, and tomato all had peptides that were identical to peptides in the human eye tissue. That's what they looked at in this study. And they found that when they ate these foods, it caused an inflammatory reaction that caused an inflammatory autoimmune reaction in the eyes of people with MS. So it's really fascinating that they're beginning to zero in on which foods are correlated with different diseases. So I think researchers are at the beginning of this field, and hopefully there'll be more information. This is one of just a few studies that I know about. But you actually can get your own body tested for food sensitivities as well as autoimmune behavior and see and personalize it that way, since we don't have a big reserve of information about this. But so this is just an example of the connection between the leaky gut and disease, and it's a very real one. This is a lab, CYREX Lab is just an example of a globally recognized lab that focuses on food sensitivities and autoimmune testing. So this is one of the labs that I use in my practice. So if somebody's having a difficult time getting to the root of the health issue, I will often suggest a test through this lab. It's a great lab, and a lot of their researchers are pioneering the field of molecular mimicry. But just generally speaking, we do know that making some general diet changes can help with leaky gut. And this would be my top list of foods to avoid. So gluten would be number one, because gluten has been bred and hybridized over the years to have a huge molecular peptide structure. So it's unfortunate. I know people love to eat bread, and yes, I think bread is delicious too, but it's just not worth it if you've got inflammation in your body or a disease process. In my opinion, it's not worth it. I guess that's up to each person to decide. But that big peptide structure of gluten, it's so big, it's unlike any natural food now, and it's just a target for the immune system. And in fact, some studies have shown that gluten will trigger leaky gut. So they've actually seen the breakdown of the tight junctions in the gut lining in response to gluten. And any food that someone's sensitive to could result in that. There was an interesting study they did where they had video cameras go down people's digestive system, and they did food sensitivity tests with these people, and they found when they ate the food they were sensitive to, the gut lining opened up. So it is a very dynamic process where if you're sensitive to a food, you've already got some inflammation established with that food and antibodies to that food, it actually will provoke leaky gut. So it's not just like, somebody took a medication or they had a life event that caused leaky gut and then they can get better. It's like if you've got leaky gut and you've got a food sensitivity, if you eat that food again, it can trigger the leaky gut again. So it's very important in many cases to stick to a healthy diet for the long term. And I know people don't always like to hear that. I would say, if you're interested in a therapeutic diet, it's good to give it at least 2 or 3 months and then reevaluate how you're doing. Usually within 2 to 3 months on a special diet like this, people are going to see a lot of improvements. You're going to be able to track that in blood tests as well as how you're feeling overall. And then, after that point, you can try to add some foods in and maintain the benefits of the diet and see what you tolerate and what you don't. And testing can be a guide to help with that if it's needed, but the testing can be expensive and not everybody needs the testing, the food sensitivity testing. Dairy is another food with a very large molecular peptide, so that's why it can be a problem with people who have leaky gut or people with autoimmunity. So generally suggest people avoid dairy. Corn actually has something called corn gluten that's a lot like gluten found, which is the protein found in wheat, barley, rye, other grains like that. Soy, again, another large molecular structure. Peanut as well. Most people are aware that peanut allergies are very common, and that's part of the reason why. Sugar doesn't actually have a large molecular structure, but it triggers inflammation by raising insulin. And if you raise insulin from having sugar, you raise inflammation. So there's a very well documented response of increase in inflammation just through insulin. So that's why sugar is not on a leaky gut diet, because you want to reduce inflammation overall. So you can't eat those things, but the things you do want to eat would be focusing on plant-based foods that work well for you. I typically do suggest people avoid all grains, so not just gluten and corn, but rice and quinoa and millet, all alternative grains, because they're so similar to gluten that people with a gluten issue typically are what's called cross-reactive, where they're also reacting to any foods that are similar, and grains fall in that group. So for carbohydrates, if you are eating moderate or high amount of carbohydrates, I suggest root vegetables or sweet potatoes. Some fresh fruits can also help provide carbohydrates. And I say that caveat because I actually follow a very low carbohydrate diet, a ketogenic diet, and that works well for me. It's not working well for everybody. So, it's important to individualize the diet. Proteins are also very important. So I've got the grass-fed bison here as an example of a high omega-3 food that's anti-inflammatory, will provide good protein for immune system support. And fat, I think I used to have a fat slide, but obviously you want to eat natural, healthy fats too, like olive oil, duck fat. So there's a lot of good fats that would be an important part of this diet. So generally speaking, you want to avoid the common allergens and inflammatory foods that I listed. I've got eggs and nightshades up here too. Eggs, sometimes people have a really hard time with eggs, so usually we avoid it initially on a special leaky gut diet. If you can get eggs that are from soy-free hens, that helps a lot, because most people in my experience are reacting to the soy and the high omega-6s in the eggs or chicken resulting from this being fed soy. Nightshades refers to the tomato family. So that's tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, potatoes. And so a lot of people will be more reactive to members of that family. Also want to avoid foods that are high lectin. Lectins are components of plant-based foods that tend to trigger inflammation. So if someone's got leaky gut, you basically want to reduce as many sources of inflammation as you can. And so that's why you would actually avoid beans and legumes, as well as grains, as well as nuts and seeds. So the diet can be very restrictive in the beginning. I mean, it's definitely not a cakewalk if you're used to the standard American diet. And you want to, again, make sure that you're eating lots of vegetables. If you need starches in your diet, then you're using a lot of healthy root vegetables, beets, carrots, turnips, rutabagas, as well as lots of healthy fat to help replace those calories that you're going to miss by restricting the diet for the initial 2 to 3 month window. One other thought is you want to perhaps, depending on the person, be careful about histamine foods. A lot of people have a lot of histamine symptoms. That would be itchiness, allergies, rashes, skin conditions are histamine issues. And the reason for this is that when there's a lot of inflammation because the immune system is reacting to the leaky gut, then the immune system can be making a lot of histamines. And the other thing that's often happening is that there's something called dysbiosis in the gut, which I mentioned, which is where the gut community is out of balance and there's an overgrowth of certain bacteria or yeast or other parasites in the gut. And those generate histamines just by being there. So a lot of people will feel a lot better and see their histamine issues reduced. Like migraines is another example of a common histamine issue, by avoiding high histamine foods. So those are any foods that are canned or cured or stored for a long time. I have an article on my website about histamine foods to give you more information, because there's some foods that are just naturally high in histamines too, like avocados, nuts and seeds. So if you know that you have histamine issues, it can be really helpful to steer clear of those foods while you're working on the underlying issue. So you do want to eat meat, like grass-fed meat, fish, like wild cold water fish, fruits, vegetables, unrefined fats, and then other root vegetables. And they actually did, there is a study with a diet, which is kind of unique because a lot of times we don't see a lot of food-based studies. We see a lot of studies that are just corollary, like let's see if people eat broccoli, if they live longer. And those studies really aren't very helpful. But this is actually a good study where they had people follow the leaky gut diet to help with chronic fatigue syndrome, and found that the majority of the participants did do much better when they followed this leaky gut diet. So again, it may be a little emotionally overwhelming to think about changing your diet so radically to follow a leaky gut diet. But the reason it's so important to do this and how you do it can vary for the person. But the reason it's so important is when you have a lot of inflammation in your body, it's like a bathtub that's overflowing. And if you just take out one food, your bathtub's overflowing. Just taking out one food, like let's say, I don't know, pick peanuts or pick gluten. For some people, there is so much inflammation that it doesn't matter. And that's why eating the best foods that are least likely to provoke inflammation are so helpful, because it's like you take out all these foods you're used to eating. Whoa, the water level in the bathtub comes down. You feel different. You feel better. And then you go, okay, maybe there is something going on with this diet. Yeah, people are telling me my screen froze. I hope it's okay now. I was just saying, in case you missed it, that you can reintroduce the foods after the initial period. And so, for example, foods you might try after an initial period on a leaky gut diet. Let's say you do leaky gut and you find a lot of your symptoms improve. Then after 2 or 3 months, you could introduce one at a time different foods in the nightshade family, different nuts, seeds, legumes, grains, perhaps. Maybe even high quality dairy, depending on the person. And you can kind of test the food if you introduce it in isolation and see how you do with it. So the leaky gut diet can actually be really helpful, but in most cases, it's not the food that's really the problem. So the food can be a remedy. I'm not arguing that. I mean, a big proponent of people changing their diet to healthy food. But we really want to think about what's the underlying driving factor for the leaky gut to begin with. Sometimes it can be just a really bad food sensitivity. I would say maybe in 5% of the cases, that's what it is. But I'd say 95% of the cases where people have leaky gut or something similar, then the issue is much broader than that. So that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the time. So the intestinal tract is basically breaking down and losing function from different triggers. It could be diet, like alcohol is known to trigger leaky gut. It could be lifestyle, just too much stress, not enough sleep, trauma. I mean, there's many things that can trigger leaky gut. It could be a medication, like general anti-inflammatory, or even a laxative, like Miralax is known to cause leaky gut. And it could be a chronic infection. And this is an area that I'm particularly interested in and work with people a lot, just mapping the gut biome and making sure that it's healthy and that any infections are eradicated. So we'll talk about that a little more. It could be from toxins. If you're just exposed to too much glyphosate through diet, like I said, unless you're eating 100% organic, we're all getting glyphosate. And I'm sure there are people who would argue with me even about that statement and say, glyphosate's in the water, it's in the rain. You can't get away from glyphosate. So we're constantly exposed to chemicals now that can trigger leaky gut. And there are steps we can take to protect the gut lining so that we're not constantly falling back into a leaky gut state and then putting us at risk. Glutathione is an antioxidant that we make in our body, and scientists have found when our glutathione levels drop, our gut becomes leaky. So making sure you've got good glutathione reserves can help. Vitamin D is also very critical for a healthy gut lining. So I want to talk about glutathione a little bit more. Glutathione is, it's important for so many things. It helps with our stress response. It helps the adrenal glands because it's an antioxidant that fuels our stress response. It helps keep our immune system from overreacting because it helps promote what's called regulatory immune cells. There were even some studies showing that people with good glutathione levels in their lungs had better coronavirus outcomes because the glutathione helps with the second stage of COVID-19 when the inflammation can really kick in and cause a problem in people's lungs. If you have glutathione, then it helps quench that inflammatory process that can happen with infections. It protects our barrier system in our gut lining. Our brain also has a barrier system, and glutathione protects the brain. So lots of benefits to glutathione. So if you eat a nourishing diet, one that is high in grass-fed meats, including organ meat, healthy eggs, healthy fresh organic produce, chances are your glutathione's pretty good. But if you've been exposed to a lot of chemicals or heavy metals, then your glutathione reserves may be depleted because every time you're exposed to something and you have to detoxify it, it uses up the glutathione. Our body recycles the glutathione we make with something called N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, N-A-C. And so you can get different supplements. You can get glutathione supplements that basically help build up your reserve again. And I find people that need glutathione or need a glutathione supplement will find a big improvement when they take it. For example, they won't be as tired or they won't be as symptomatic, but fatigue is one of the big signs of glutathione depletion and leaky gut. Once someone takes glutathione for a little while, you can often stop the glutathione, which is good because it's kind of expensive as a supplement, and take something called NAC. You can also take the NAC while you're taking glutathione. NAC, like I said, helps the liver to recycle the glutathione. So if you don't suspect your glutathione levels are depleted, but you do want to do something to just make sure they stay strong, NAC is a great thing to do. And there's many other benefits to NAC as a supplement as well. It's generally very anti-inflammatory, good for thyroid function. Some other things that help your body make more glutathione are cold water. So cold water swimming has been studied in swimmers and found to boost people's glutathione levels. So some people will do cold showers, but we don't have a lot of science showing that this is helpful yet, but there are some preliminary studies that show if you submerge yourself in cold water or get cold to the point of shivering, that it helps boost your mitochondrial activity. The mitochondria are like the powerhouses in our cells, and that increases glutathione production. Coffee enemas have also been shown to improve the liver's glutathione production, and raw milk is an example of a food that contains a lot of glutathione. Of course, if you were on the leaky gut diet, you probably wouldn't do raw milk, but there may be some situations where that's therapeutic and a good choice. This is just a picture of some different glutathione supplements. These are some of my favorite ones to work with. Vitamin D is similarly very critical. Here in Wisconsin, you cannot make adequate vitamin D between October to May, really. You can't, we're too far north and we don't get enough UV radiation from the sun during those months to make enough vitamin D for our body's basic needs. And one of those basic needs is keeping the gut healthy. I have a vitamin D webinar that you can view on my website that talks all about this very benefits of vitamin D. So I encourage you to check that out. But going outside every day to get direct sunlight on your skin without sunscreen helps with making vitamin D. You can also get a light. I like this Birdie light. It's a therapeutic vitamin D lamp that you can use instead of a supplement. A vitamin D supplement can be a good alternative for some people too. So making sure those vitamin D levels are good is really critical to not developing leaky gut. And by really good, I mean around 60, at least 60 to 80 on a blood test. So we've talked a lot about some different things that help with leaky gut. And one of the processes with leaky gut is that there can be this ongoing inflammation. And so it can really help to work with a couple of different superfoods, turmeric and resveratrol. Boswellia is another good one. And these down-regulate the inflammatory chemicals made by the immune system. So those can be taken as supplements. Some people will also make like a turmeric tea. So lots of different options for getting those into a routine. Sometimes it can be really helpful to take extra probiotics too. The probiotics will help maintain a healthy gut lining. So this picture is of Progrert. Progrert is the highest volume probiotic you can get on the market without a prescription. It's 1 trillion critters per dose. So it's like you're taking a whole bottle with every dose. And so I found that to be therapeutic in some cases of leaky gut. And I really love this product called Ion Biome. It used to be called Restore. This is the product that was involved in the research study. I'll show you in a minute here. So we already looked at a couple of these pictures. You see on the left, the healthy gut lining. You see in the middle, what happens to the gut lining when it's exposed to Roundup or glyphosate. And you see on the right, what happened in the study when the cells were given the Ion Biome. So the Ion Biome is a terrahydrite. It's basically dirt water. So they take this buried soil water and make it into a supplement. And it's from a time on the Earth's environment when the bacterial community was much more diverse. And so it helps with the signaling in our gut cells so that the cell linings can't pull apart when they're exposed to nasty chemicals. So it basically helps build a healthy community in the gut and helps with the communication between the gut cells. It's actually kind of a unique therapy. People are often asking me about probiotics, and I think probiotics definitely have a role for people, but if you're taking a probiotic supplement every day, it's like you're just adding this static amount of the same bacteria every day, and you're not really doing anything else than that. But the Ion Biome, this dirt water supplement, gives your bacteria, the good bacteria, food. So your biome can adapt in its own direction, which is my understanding is what studies show is the healthiest thing for it to do. So I actually have started suggesting the iome biome for most people. I mean, there are some therapeutic situations where you need probiotics for sure. But I've started to rely on the iome biome for giving people gut support because you get the support against the leaky gut. And you also get support for the development and evolution of your own biome. So it's kind of cool stuff. And this is a field that's always evolving. You know, we're every month we learn more, so it'll be interesting to see. Okay, so in summary, if you want to work on the healthy immune system, it's important to have a diet that's suited to your situation. You may want to consider supplementing with glutathione or NAC or having some lifestyle practices to help support that. Turmeric and resveratrol can really help with downregulating inflammation from an overactive immune system. Vitamins A, D, and K are the same way. They help with the immune system basic function. Probiotics can be helpful. Digestive enzymes is something we haven't talked about yet. Oh, I think I froze. Okay, now we're back. Digestive enzymes can help a lot because part of why food sensitivities develop is because we're not completely breaking the food down to begin with. So a digestive enzyme supplement is an example of something that helps with complete digestion, and that will help reduce food sensitivities and the inflammation stemming from them. We talked about some gut and some liver support things. Iome biome is the supplement, of course, that helps with leaky gut, but there's other things that help with leaky gut too, like zinc carnosine, glutamine, mucilaginous herbs like marshmallow root. So there's a lot of different options out there and many different kind of leaky gut health supplements that people can get a benefit from. It's also important to rest and relax, right? Our body is amazing and it does repair itself, but we need to have a good balance of activities, physical activity, but also adequate rest. So those are all really helpful things, but sometimes people have a case where they want to go a little deeper, or maybe they're symptomatic, and even making the basic dietary changes and adding in some good supplements doesn't really take care of the full picture for someone. So some of the things that I do in cases like that are functional blood chemistry, where I look at the basic blood work. This can be ordered by the doctor, or I can help people with getting that done. I look at that with what's called functional ranges, which are different than standard medical ranges, so that we can really optimize blood work. An example of that would be vitamin D. If you look at your vitamin D lab work from your doctor, it might say the healthy range is 30 to 80. But that's not really optimal, even though if you're above 30, you're not dying of a vitamin D deficiency. For example, when you're below 40, you have significant bone loss occurring. If you're below 50, you may be at risk for some different types of cancer. And we know a lot about vitamin D. I won't go on to belabor my point. So anyway, sometimes really looking critically at someone's lab results to look for optimal nutritional status, optimal organ status can really help with guiding decisions. This GI map stool test is one that's really cool to do, especially if you're doing some digging around leaky gut, and I'll show you in a minute. It has a number of different markers that give us information about the state of the digestive system so that we know exactly what to do to help restore the gut to a healthy level. And then food sensitivity testing, of course, like I mentioned with the CYREX labs, can be really invaluable if someone seems like they can't figure out what they're reacting to, or they just want the insight of a test. So the GI map, I really like this stool test because it's extremely sensitive. It picks up things that aren't going to be picked up in a medical test. They use DNA-based testing and they're counting the cells in the stool sample. So it's extremely sensitive and you're not going to miss a subclinical infection that might be creating issues in a more sensitive person. So I find it's extremely relevant to people and it's very comprehensive. Like it gives me a lot of information to help someone come up with a really clear plan on improving their gut health. This is just an example. So when I do a GI map, we get 5 pages and this is the last page, the 5th page, but we get all of these intestinal health markers. So steatocrit tells me how well someone's digesting their fat. Elastase 1 tells me how well the pancreas is working. Do they need pancreatic enzymes? Beta-glucuronidase is a toxin typically made by bacteria in the gut that stops detoxification in the colon. So in this case, for example, the person had high levels of that because they had dysbiosis. And so this helped with understanding why when they tried to take different steps to get their gut healthy, they were getting sick because they needed something to help get this toxin out of the gut so that everything worked okay. We check for blood. We also check secretory IgA. This is the immune response. So if secretory IgA in the gut is low, which is often a thing if someone's had a prolonged infection or a prolonged food sensitivity, then you know that it's kind of an uphill battle. So you have to, step 1, improve the person's immune system before you can do anything else for their gut. Anti-gliadin IgA is a marker for gluten sensitivity, so that's sometimes helpful to see. Calprotectin is a marker for inflammation in the colon, so we know, do we need to be spending money on anti-inflammatories for the gut, or is that not really an issue? And then zonulin is the most pertinent marker for this talk today. Zonulin is a protein made when there's leaky gut. So this person came up lab high for zonulin, so we knew, okay, yeah, a lot of your symptoms are from leaky gut. It's probably related to this dysbiosis and the fact that the immune system is exhausted. So we're going to use that information to help come up with a plan. So just an example where if somebody has a difficult situation and they're not getting better from the basic diet and supplement changes, it can be really insightful to spend the money on some extra testing. Okay, so in summary, leaky gut is really common and actually believed to be part of the aging process now. And we believe it occurs, number 1, when glutathione levels are depleted, but there's probably a lot of other things that are involved besides just glutathione, like vitamin D, somebody's stress level, exposure to, different chemicals or medication. Leaky gut symptoms can be alleviated by following a special diet, and sometimes doing some extra testing can really help with this piece. And supplements like turmeric and glutathione, ion biome, can be really helpful to tighten up the junctures. So you can't overcome leaky gut just by changing your diet. You have to do something actively to help tighten up the junctures in the gut again and reduce the inflammation for somebody. So it's really important long-term to minimize your chemical exposure as much as possible and get as much sunlight as you can. So just one final plug that if you enjoyed this talk, I hope you'll join me next month in June. We'll be talking about healthy meats and fish. And I do these 45-minute private sessions through the co-op that are just $40. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me. And here's where to find me. So I'm going to pull up the questions. Okay, so first question was, what is your web address? So you should be able to see it here. Do I have, oh, I'm sorry, let me go up to the top. My business is Human Nature, and I'm located on the west side of Madison. Is gluten sensitivity reversible? I love that question. Gluten sensitivity is a spectrum. So some people, if you're at the end of the spectrum where you're damaged and you have celiac, then no, it's not going to be reversible. If you're on this end of the spectrum where you just have a slight gluten sensitivity, then yeah, potentially if you did a lot of healing and worked really well on your diet, you may be able to incorporate gluten again. But most people, as they age, slide this way. So once you have a gluten sensitivity, it's probably really important to continue to avoid gluten. But not everybody has a gluten sensitivity. So I guess I'm not giving you a straight black and white answer. It really depends on the person. Yeah, it's possible with a lot of gut and digestive support, if that was what led to the gluten sensitivity to begin with, that you could overcome it. For example, I'll tell you about me. I did one of those GI map tests on myself a couple years ago when I started getting into that. And one of the things I learned was that my pancreatic enzyme levels were really low. And I had always taken digestive enzymes, but I had never specifically taken pancreatic enzymes. And when I started taking those to help my digestion, I was able to eat a lot more foods that I had previously been sensitive to. So my sensitivity wasn't really due to antibodies to gluten primarily, or an immune response to gluten. It was mostly because I had poor digestion. So it kind of depends on why you have the gluten sensitivity. Some people's immune system just really reacts to gluten, and there's not a lot you can do to change that. So will I be sharing the slides? So with all of these talks, I am recording it, or I thought I was recording it. I think, yeah, we're recording. Sorry, you can tell I'm a professional at this Zoom thing. So I will send this program out via my e-newsletter, and I also will post it on my website in a couple of weeks once I'm able to process the video. How does IBS fit in? That's a really interesting question. So yeah, I mean, IBS is a very general diagnosis. Unfortunately, it's not very specific about how the disease process develops. So there can be leaky gut and there can be dysbiosis. In IBS, there can be a lot of food sensitivities. That study I was telling you where they put the camera down people's gut and they watched the gut open and shut from food sensitivities, that was done with IBS patients. So yeah, all of this is very applicable to IBS and a worthwhile protocol in general for someone with IBS. This is prevalent also where cultures that maize, organic corn that are non-GMO are staples. I think you must have asked that question when I was talking about something, so I'm not sure about that. It could be that non-GMO foods would be less antagonistic to the immune system and less likely to trigger an immune response. So that's an important consideration. Have you seen any research on leaky gut and primary immunodeficiencies? No, I haven't. I would have to look that up. But I think it most likely is involved in immunodeficiencies because vitamin D is especially important in immunodeficiency disorders. And we know that vitamin D is very important for keeping the gut lining together. So it all kind of comes together in the same ball of wax. Are lactose-free dairy products okay? I would say no. In general, lactose-free dairy products are probably not okay because they still have the protein, the dairy protein. Is teff gluten-free? Yes, I believe teff is gluten-free, but wouldn't be on a leaky gut diet because you would still be avoiding grains, at least initially. Is it important to eat organic sweet potatoes and winter squash or root vegetables? Yes, it's my understanding that a lot of the root vegetables or squash that grows on the ground can accumulate more chemicals and pesticides. But I don't know if they're on the Dirty Dozen. You can look up the Dirty Dozen, it's called, it's updated annually for the worst crops, and see where the sweet potatoes and other ones you're asking about would be. As an athlete, need to consume a fair amount of calories. If you're saying to avoid grains, do you have any advice, resources for guidance? Yes. Well, I mean, you can replace grains with root vegetables. Lots of beets, lots of squash, lots of sweet potatoes. I mean, that's really a win-win. And I would make it up with fat. So finding high-fat foods that are on your diet will supply the calories you need. With bison, should you make sure it is grass-fed? Yes, I would. When the animal eats grass, it's much more likely to be high omega-3. When it eats grain, it's much more likely to be omega-6. So most problems with inflammation, especially in Americans, come from too much omega-6 food, which is grain-based food. So if the animal is eating more what's in its natural dietary repertoire, then the animal is going to be healthier and going to pass on those health benefits to you. Okay, somebody wanted to see the slide of the glutathione supplements. So we can go back to that. And then somebody asked, what type of fat with turmeric? Let's see if I can go back here. So these are the glutathione supplements. I like this one by Orthomolecular. This is on my website. And this one by Empirical Labs is good if you like a liquid and you don't like any sweeteners added. It's very basic. The Orthomolecular one is a capsule. So fat with turmeric. Oh my gosh, any fat. Okay, so ghee, olive oil, flax oil, hemp oil, green tea seed oil, bacon lard, bacon grease, lard, duck fat, avocados, nuts. If you're not on this special diet, I'm talking about eggs. So any coconut oil. Hopefully that gives you some idea. And you heard you should use pepper with turmeric. What's my take on that? Yeah, it's hard to absorb all the medicinal components of turmeric. And so some people formulate them with black pepper. Other people will take it with pineapple, ginger. So just so long as you're taking it with something that helps digestion, I do think that research is well-founded. Let's see. What about essential oils? So essential oils are great topically. I would be careful with introducing essential oils with someone who has leaky gut because the oils are so strong internally. So I'd be careful with internal use of essential oils and only use them if you really knew what you were doing because they can actually make the leaky gut case worse. Where can one buy Ion Biome? You can buy Ion Biome on my website, humannaturellc.com, or you can call me or email me. I have a sale day the third Wednesday, so next Wednesday is the 10% off day. What's the relationship with antibiotics and leaky gut? That's a really good question. We do know that antibiotics can cause leaky gut. Some of them are worse than others. So sometimes that's the implication for throwing the gut. Sometimes if somebody took antibiotics, that could initiate a lot of problems in the gut. But not always. Some people tolerate antibiotics well enough. So you really want to take that on a case-by-case basis. I do like to suggest the Ion Biome and probiotics to people. Beets high in sugar. Yeah, beets can be high in sugar. So if you don't do well with lots of beets or lots of sugar, you definitely want to take them in small amounts or moderation. And somebody asked about gallstones. I'll talk about those in just a minute. Please talk about root turmeric versus turmeric supplements. You know, I find some people respond well to just using turmeric root, like grating it and making a tea with it or a golden milk with it, where they take it in coconut milk. And like maybe they have arthritis, for example, and they can tell when they take the turmeric it's better, would be a common example. And other people do much better with a supplement. Maybe they find it's more convenient or it's more therapeutic. The supplement, there are some whole turmeric supplements. Orthomolecular just came out with one called Tariva, but a lot of the turmeric supplements on the market are just curcumin, which is what's had been studied for a long time to be the most therapeutic component. So yeah, you could get more benefits from a broader turmeric supplement. But I also think people get great anti-inflammatory benefits just from curcumin extracts of turmeric. So it's really kind of an individual thing. And then a question about dissolving gallstones. So I would suggest looking up a supplement called malic acid, MALIC ACID. I can help order it for you if you want. I don't know if the co-op carries it. You could certainly call them and ask. But malic supplements are a natural supplement that can help break down or help dissolve gallstones. Without knowing more about the situation, I would say generally they work in a mild case. If a case was very advanced or there's a lot of extensive gallstones, then it may be less effective. But some of the things we're talking about with gut health, enzyme production, I talked about stomach acid last month. That can be very important for gallbladder health because you need that strong signaling in the digestive system in order to have a healthy gallbladder. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me. So pleased that you did. I hope you got something out of it and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.